Hi, I'm Jacqueline. I'm the Executive Director of Therapist in Tech. And today I have the co-founder and CEO of Healthy Gamer and also coaching manager with Healthy Gamer, and also Sharon with Therapist in Tech. We're all here today to talk about our next moves. Everyone, talk about the industry, talk about how to look at job descriptions. Yes. Well, Susan, let's see what happens with the recording.
It might get a little spicy.
It might get a little spicy, but so we are recording, but we will determine if we're going to disseminate it or not. So let's get started.
Sounds good. Hi guys, my name is Kruti Kanojia. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Healthy Gamer. Healthy Gamer is a subclinical mental health platform made for the internet generation. Alex, would you like to go?
Sure. I'm the coaching operations manager at Healthy Gamer. I've actually been here about 6 months. Before that, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I've been working in schools, mostly high school and college level, for about 7-8 years now. So this is kind of my shift over into tech.
All right. Next slide, please. All right, Kruti, tell us a little bit about Healthy Gamer, what you all do.
Sure. So Healthy Gamer, I founded it actually with my husband. He's a psychiatrist. He's known online as Dr. K. He kind of had this realization as a gamer himself, like, hey, the mental health kind of industry doesn't really know what's going on with young people. And he would kind of tell me how he's having like the same conversation over and over and over again with young men. And at the time I was doing my healthcare management MBA, and I was like, well, of course you are, because young men are the most egregiously underserved population in mental health. So he kind of looked at it as gamers and the culture and the language and the kind of spaces that this population occupied. And I looked at more as issues and kind of accessibility problems and access or like affordability struggles and things like that. And so when we kind of really put our heads down and thought about it, we thought, really what people are struggling with, like the mental health part, the mental like illness part wasn't as prevalent and maybe as the thing that we could uniquely do as the psychoeducation would be, as the peer coaching could be. So that's where we decided to kind of operate within the broader mental health landscape. So we started it just kind of he and I, and now we are coming up on 20 full-time employees and 116 coaches, plus additional kind of agency staff on like editing YouTube videos and things like that. We do content, coaching, and community. And 6 months ago is when we decided to double our coaching program, which is when we were like, Alex, please help.
Amazing. All right.
WTF, man. It's been a wild couple months in the space. Lots of layoffs, lots of kind of, I don't know, just the market has been nuts. And just wanted to kind of acknowledge that the way we had planned this conversation to go is very different than like what the reality of the moment is right now.
Yeah. Let's go to the next slide so we can kind of talk about it a little bit. So let's talk about a little bit. I know myself as a clinician coming into this market a few years back, like right before COVID started, it seemed like money was like falling out of the sky at all of these companies. And there were all of these like inflated salaries and bonuses. And so let's talk a little bit about like, what's the struggle? Like, what's the disconnect? Like, what's happening with the B2B and the B2C right now?
Sure. I think in the macro environment, what was happening when a lot of these companies were raising 2019 and then raising like crazy in 2020, money was very cheap. So people were getting valuations on what are called multiples, and digital health had very high multiples. So even if you were only going to make $1 in revenue, you were getting a 10x, 10 times multiple. And so even if that company was only going to bring in $1, people thought one day that company is going to bring in $10 because digital health was just very hyped. So digital health companies, sure, Vicki, digital health companies at the time, including behavioral health and mental health companies, were looking at markets in two ways. They were thinking about what's the business to business or the B2B market, and what's the business to consumer or the B2C market. So what was happening in 2019, 2020, and 21 is companies were really finding that their workforces were facing burnout, mental health was reaching like crisis points, and a lot of employers wanted to provide additional mental health benefits. So that's where you had companies like IBM and Microsoft and huge Pepsi, like these huge companies having contracts with companies like Ginger, which is now Headspace Health, or Cerebral,
And
or
Spring Health is one too, Spring Health.
Spring
Mhm.
Health, right? Or Modern Health, any one of
Right.
these like huge companies, Lyra, right?
Mhm.
To support thousands of people at a time. So you get a lot of money coming from employers into these companies. Well, now if you look at what's going on with employers, with the interest rates going up, like money isn't cheap anymore. So companies are cutting back because customers are paying less. So if these companies are making less, like and these are like Meta or Facebook laying off people, companies like Stripe, which is like almost as stable as an internet company can really be. It's like the Visa of the internet. Like the idea of Visa doing layoffs is like crazy, right? But it's going to start happening. So employers are cutting back on their spending. So there's less huge contracts coming into behavioral health companies. So that's one huge hit that they're taking. And then on the customer side, you'll hear companies talk about CAC a lot, or CAC, customer acquisition cost. And it costs some of these companies around $500 on average to acquire a single new customer. And then they acquire that customer, which means that they've signed up, they've made an account, they've purchased a plan to see a therapist, and then they're going to pay the therapist rate. And then they have all of the overhead, all of the liability, everything else. And now customer acquisition is more expensive. It's going to cost them more money to have more customers. And that makes it unsustainable. They're going to lose more money the more customers they get, which is, maybe not the best way to build your business from the beginning. But that's what venture capital essentially does, is it says, spend $300 million, get all of the customers you can, win that market, make those customers love you, make them not want to go anywhere else, no matter what it costs. And then eventually, one day you'll be profitable. But if the macroeconomics of that market change, that model goes out the door. So what stability used to look like, right, previously was more about when the customer, the company that wins the most customers and gets those customers in early, think Gmail versus Yahoo, right? The one that has the most customers and the most customer loyalty wins. And now customers are fickle. I didn't like that therapist. I'll try a new one. I didn't like that one either. I'm going to try a new platform.
Yeah.
I don't like that platform. I'm just going to get my meds. And so when customers can go any which way and they have no loyalty, but that company has spent $500, they're out that amount of cash to have got you. And now all of these, like, the more you switch around with these therapists, the more companies are bleeding money, right? It's not stable at all. And that's why you're seeing this huge correction. In the future, I think it will stabilize. I think you're going to see a lot more emphasis on like back to basics, like where can we be more efficient? So Cerebral saying, hey, we're going to take that marketing money and we're going to put it into patient safety. And it's like, well, why wouldn't you do that in the first place? And the reason they didn't is because they had to keep up. They were being forced to compete at those high customer acquisition costs.
I want to go back a little bit, like, let's talk about that. Like, I feel like people, and I just recently understood about how venture works.
Yeah.
And I think that it's different, like when you are going into business for yourself, like an LLC, but if you're going after venture money, like it is like high pressured right now, lots of money, and you have to believe whatever you thought that you wanted your company to be when you sold it. Almost like drinking the Kool-Aid of like, even if it's a terrible idea, because sometimes like I look around and I'm like, this company is not a really good idea, but they're getting money and they're still like pushing forward. So can we talk a little bit about like when you go after venture money, like how you can't really go backwards, like you're kind of like at the mercy of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So the conventional wisdom with venture funding is if I give you $1 today, I want $10 back in 5 years. In 5 years, your company needs to be 10 times more valuable than it is right now. Well, how are you going to do that? You have to get a lot of customers in, and you're willing to bleed that money out in order to make your company more valuable in the future. Venture capital is different than companies that would never get a loan. No bank in the world is going to be like, oh, I'm going to get my money back. No bank in the world is going to give that loan. But a venture capitalist will say, if I have a chance of getting 10x back, I'm going to give 10 companies $1 each. 9 of them are going to fail, and I'm okay with that because one of them is going to get me my money back. And so what you're seeing are bets placed in the market, knowing that 90% of those companies are going to fail.
That's right.
And you're seeing a lot of money being thrown around because the stakes are so high, because behavioral health needs disruption. I don't think there's a therapist in this world that looks around and be like, yep, this is how it's supposed to be. I don't think that's true. I think we all know something needs to change, right? Everyone has a little bit of a different version of that. And so people are going to place the bets on the thing that's like the most ambitious, but also the most realistic. I think I can get everyone on my platform because I think I can win over the most providers. So my strategy as a business, win the best providers, then I'll get the most customers. Or my strategy as a provider is I'm going to make it super cheap. And so I'm going to have the cheapest service. Well, my strategy is going to be, I'm going to have the most insurance contracts. So I'm going to get Humana to invest in me, and I'm going to get the Humana contract. So everybody's got a different strategy. Everybody's going to place their bets a little bit differently.
Yeah. And so what do you think stability looks like for the future now that we know like what's happening right now? Like, what do you think like the future is going to look like?
I think essentially there are a couple of things happening in the marketplace, and our coaches are contractors, so I pay attention to this all the time. I think you're going to have a lot more power going back to labor, essentially having the therapists or the providers having a lot more bargaining power at the table. And you see this already, right? After Cerebral and Brightline and others have announced their layoffs, you're seeing just this backlash of like, well, let me tell you what really happened. Yeah. So you're going to see companies get away with less, which means that they have to spend more on employment, on benefits, etc. And the more the company has to spend, the more the company has to charge. And if the company has to charge more than what an individual therapist is going to charge, the whole model breaks. Yeah. So you're going to see companies really trying to squeeze labor, and you're going to see that tension between labor and the companies, which means that bargaining power that therapists used to have is going to go down.
Let's talk a little bit about how, like, this is like Q4, right? And how or we're going into Q4, like why companies are doing layoffs right now. Like, I think sometimes people don't understand how you have to see what the financials look like quarter after quarter. And like right now, we're seeing that people aren't able to show the revenue or the profit that they once said that they would be able to prove. And so do you feel like that has something to do with like the timing of the layoffs of this time of year that it's happening, that these companies are having to go back to their investors and they're showing them that they are or are not like making money?
Yes, I think there's a lot of tension because rates are going one way, they're going up. And so money, the value of money is getting more and more as time goes on. So you want to conserve the cash as fast as you can, because if you had to borrow $20 million now, as opposed to 2 months ago, that interest is going to cost you more now. So you wanted to be able to consider, like, taking the humanity out of it completely and thinking just cash. That $20 million was more valuable 2 months ago than it is today. And that's what inflation is, right? But pure and simple.
Yeah.
But that when you're predicting that and you're seeing that, and then you're seeing, oh shit, my biggest customer just laid off 20% of their workforce. And you're counting on those juicy B2B contracts. You see the writing on the wall. And then further, if these companies raised, $200, $300 million in 2020, they're supposed to run out of that money. They're supposed to spend that money. They're supposed to grow as fast as they can to hit those next milestones. Well, that means that they would be raising again right around, like they would be gearing up for a raise now to have more money in the bank in about a year or two. If they can't show that they can operate in good times and in bad, because the world is just getting more volatile, right? So if they can't show that discipline now, they're not going to get that capital, which means they're going to fail. So these are like desperation moves. A layoff is always kind of a desperation move, but that's just a little bit of the context.
I think also some of the poor planning, the kind of like rush to things is also getting like the lights kind of being shown on it now, with a lot of the regulatory issues and the investigations and that kind of stuff that's being seen, and the things are having to take a step back and kind of go back to, okay, we're getting into trouble, we're getting fined, all this stuff is happening, which impacts customers, which impacts potentially the entire DEA prescription system. Like, it's a huge thing that is tinting the entire market in a way.
Yeah. I also feel like to keep on that point, like this is a very unregulated market also. And, I don't know how anyone feels about like regulation and federal involvement, but it just seems like since they're like, people can just do what they want. And like a lot of these businesses, they start the business and they don't know, like you said, the first thing about compliance, about licensure, about working across state lines, patient safety. And I don't know. I just think I agree with you. I just think that it's just such poor planning from the beginning. Yeah, thanks for that comment, Alex.
Well, I think what you saw was money was cheap, regulations were relaxed. Here's our chance. And so you saw a huge ramp up period that was only ever going to be temporary. They didn't talk about it like it was temporary. They didn't act like it was temporary, but it was temporary. I think the smarter move would have been 1099 employment. The smarter move would have been, putting people on 1 or 2 year contracts, knowing it's going to end, right? Don't make people think that this is their future. I think that would have been like the better way to do it, and pay them more for it.
Yeah.
This is going to be a 2-year thing. We don't know when these are going to, but we're going to pay you a premium to have those 2 years. but which kind of brings us to that W-2 versus 1099. Do you want to work for yourself or do you want to work for someone else? I think the main thing that larger companies have that independent practitioners don't have is bargaining power with payers, right? They can get $115 reimbursement. An individual practitioner can get maybe 95.
Maybe 70.
Maybe 70.
Maybe.
Or 45
I'm used
minutes.
to working, yeah, depending on, of course, the licensure and everything else. But they're going to be able to squeeze that, right? And the larger company can say, hey, this is a whole managed care team, so I'm going to bill against this code, and somebody else reviewed the notes here, bill. Whereas a solo practitioner can't. So here are the things that I would say to figure out if you're going to work as a 1099, you should charge 30 to 40% more than your normal rate. Here's why. When you work as a W-2, your company is paying taxes, they're paying benefits, they're paying a lot more. They're paying about 30% more than your salary. Let's say you make $100,000. That company is paying $130,000 to employ you. So when you work as a 1099, don't charge them to make $100,000, charge them to make $130,000. Because you're going to be paying benefits and you're going to be paying taxes.
Right.
But don't think of your comp you have to think of your whole package when you're charging as a 1099.
That's very good.
Yeah, I mean, that's like my kind of number one guideline. The second thing you can think of is, those taxes, fees, et cetera, especially for benefits. And for a lot of us, it's health insurance. That's going to be the big additional cost, right? Well, if you're a solo practitioner, make sure you have an LLC and look into joining something called a PEO. And a PEO is something that has bargaining power. So when we were starting out, when we were just 2, 3, 4 people, we wanted to join a larger organization that could get us better insurance packages. And even now, we just joined a new PEO, even though we're bigger now, because you want to be part of something that has that collective bargaining power. And running a business is not easy. And I kind of think of it as like, it's really hard to be a good mom. It takes so much energy to do every single thing right. But it's pretty easy to be a okay mom. It's pretty easy to just make chicken nuggets and throw on the TV and whatever else, no judgment. But
chicken nuggets tonight.
That amount of energy that it takes to go from like being okay to like amazing is extraordinary.
What does PEO stand for?
I think it stands for Private Employment Organization, but essentially what it is, it's instead of me a one-person LLC and you a one-person LLC, instead of us each running off and trying to find our own insurance plans and benefits, there's a single unified organization that will say, hey, I've got 100 LLCs, treat me like a 100-person employee company and give me those packages. And then every LLC in there gets access to the collective bargaining agreement.
Nice. Here I was just getting insurance from a broker.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next slide.
Sure.
All right.
Do you want me to take this one?
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, you or Alex?
Not me.
Okay, I'll take it. This is just how I always think of things. And I apologize that my attribution isn't here. I lifted some of these bullet points, but the builder, fixer, optimizer is kind of a classic framework. So are you somebody who likes to build things that are new? Then you should look at certain kinds of teams and roles. You should look for earlier stage You can look for kind of more creativity in your role. You're not coming in to come in and manage a bunch of stuff. So for example, I'm a builder. I'm fine with like a big clean slate and just figuring out what happens. I get really frustrated by like taking small things and tweaking them. I like kind of big, messy things. Some people are fixers. They like to come in, look at a lot of data, figure out exactly like, oh, I could fix this problem. Here's what's going to happen here. And like, this thing's a little broken. And if I do this and that'll make that easier. Whereas if you say, hey, I need you to take on this brand new thing and just figure it out, that's when they're like, So if you're a fixer, you want to come in a little bit more mid-stage. You want to have a team. You want to have a process in place. You want to be able to maybe have a manager that you know you're going to click with. Builders can kind of like, I don't love the manager, but I love the company. I love the mission. I can figure it out. I can head up a new department. Fixers tend to be like, I really want to be able to work well with my manager. An optimizer is something for more of a late stage company where like you would be joining like an Apple or something like that now, where you say, this is great. I can join a winning team and help it keep winning. Their big strength is efficiency, because they can help say like, now that you've got this ship up and running, here's how I can kind of cut the fat. Okay, you want me to get 200 cases in every week and you want me to figure out a way to hit this very specific goal, I can do that. And they like kind of that defined, like, am I hitting my metrics?
Let me ask you a question about this, because sometimes, like in the past, I've been on interviews where I had one interview with one company with the CEO who wanted me to take like a personality test. Do you feel like that's useful in knowing like where you are here and like where, like as a leader, where to place a potential employee?
I do. I really do, because in a very simple way to think about it is like, think of a house. Do you want to build a house from scratch, or does that seem overwhelming and pain in the ass to you? Would you rather renovate something that like just needed like a couple rooms, or could you take on a big renovation project? Do you want something that's like already ready because you're like, oh, I can keep up with the warranties and just let me move in? And depending on the kind of person you are, if you're a CEO of a company and you're saying, I want to build out my pediatric unit, you need somebody that can be like, okay, I got this. I can take what you've kind of got going here, but I can build something new for you. Right. And you want to be able to demonstrate to that person that is like really putting a lot of hopes on you to come through, that like, I can build something. If somebody is saying, for example, hey, I'm trying, Alex, or would you say you are in this?
I'm probably closer to fixer, with a little bit of optimizer in there, I think. Would you agree? I don't know. I'm so torn.
I would say you're actually between fixer and builder, but you are definitely fixer / something, right?
Yep.
So when did you come into the process?
I definitely came in kind of during the middle phase. Like we had something going that we needed to tweak. We needed to kind of get in there and see what is it doing well? What do we want it to be? And how can we make it better?
Exactly. You came in through a ramp up process. And like builders cannot live without fixers. So she came in and she was like, I love documentation. I was like, great.
What?
Yeah.
I don't love doing it, but I love telling
I have here.
She was like, I can manage a resource library. And I was like, I don't know what any of my passwords are. And so like, it was like this instant click, right? And one of the other things that really stood out to me about Alex was, can you be the bad guy? And she's like, I don't like being the bad guy, but I can do it. And you're like, great, because you're about to go through a lot of people and we're a very public brand. And I need you to be able to be firm and hold us to a really high standard, right? And so those personality fits, I need a bad cop. I don't need a bad person. I need a bad cop. I need a good bad cop. I need somebody who's organized. I need somebody who can like take something and run with it. And that's when like her personality really stood out.
What about her personality? Now I want to know,
Oh,
like,
boy.
from a CEO. No, really. I mean, you're hiring someone to be your coaching operations manager. Like, that's huge.
Yeah. And it was a very high kind of pressure position. And we took a lot of time with this. Alex, what did you say your animal was?
I was going to ask, because I'm like, you asked this fantastic, it wasn't animal. You asked if I could have any thing, whether it was a maid, a personal trainer, a chef, or something else. What was the other one? And that stuck with me so much because I was like, I love that question.
You could have a personal assistant, a personal masseuse, a personal trainer, or a chef.
A chef. And I said chef.
And why? Yeah.
Why did you say chef?
Because I hate cooking, and it would be like, it's like that thing that I'm like, I don't want to do this. And it frees up everything else for me. Okay. And I asked Kruti, I was like, what was the reason for that question? Like, what did you get from that?
So to me, anybody who says I need a personal assistant, I can't work with. Other people, maybe. Other people are.
Tell me why though. Tell us why.
Because I don't know what my passwords are. I don't know where anything is. I need to be able to have my chaotic builder energy and somebody else be like, okay, I got this. The other thing it signaled to me is Alex knew what her strengths were. I don't like it, not good at it. I don't want to. These are things I'm good at.
Good.
Jacqueline, this is us. This is straight up us.
I love this.
Yeah.
So let's go to the next slide.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so I just want to, I'm going to pause right here and just see if anybody has any pressing questions about what we just talked about. I know we talked about a lot of different things. So if anybody has questions they want to throw in the chat or in the Q&A anonymously, feel free to do those things now. And then we can hop into like looking at some job descriptions and talking about that process. Takers. Okay, let's hop into the job descriptions. So a lot of people in our community are trying to figure out very much what you just said, Kruti, about where do my skills fit and what are my strengths? And like when you read a job description, you're like, what is this? Like, what is it saying? Okay, we have one question. Any suggestions for finding cover letter examples? I feel like I can describe myself in an academia way, but definitely not an industry way. That's a great question. I don't know anything about cover letters. I am also going to the cover letter support group.
I think a cover letter, you want it to be very short and sweet. You want to hit 3 bullets. Can you manage people? Can you work with people? Tell me how I've mentored this many people. I have, hired this many people. I've trained this many people. Show me that you can work with people. With Alex, it was that bad cop situation. She worked in schools. She told me about the nature of working in schools. You got to get along with a lot of different personalities. Can you work with people? Talk about that in 1 bullet. The second bullet is going to be about, do you know how to manage performance? Tell me, hey, even as a private therapist, I had 80% of my clients show up. I have a very low cancellation rate and I'm really proud of that. Or, I produced great outcomes. I knew that when I was working with a client or a patient, I'm able to move the needle on these things. Show me that you understand and measure and care about performance. That would be the second bullet. The third one, I think, is show a hunger and a curiosity and an ability to learn more skills, because none of us knows everything that we need to know. We're all figuring it out. But a lot of times therapists will come in and say, I've done a little bit of this, but I'm really eager to learn. It's great that you're eager to learn, but there aren't a lot of people that have the time or patience to sit there and teach you. Can you learn it by yourself? Can you figure it out by yourself? And that's what's going to be really critical. Hey, I'm new to product management. I've taken a couple of courses. I've built a few kind of lightweight websites. I can pick up these languages pretty easily. Or depending on the role, like, I'm not a full-blown designer, but I can work in Canva, and I've made a couple of social media posts for a couple of lightweight pages. I know how to manage the analytics, and I went through Facebook's free ad manager program. I'm certified in Google ads or Facebook ads. Like, show some industry certification and some knowledge and that just ability to learn more. And you guys are good learners.
You guys as in therapists.
Therapists are good learners. They just don't know they're good learners sometimes.
Yeah.
And this is my subject matter, and this is what I've chosen. And then some of the other stuff gets intimidating. But I promise you, your coursework is so much harder than getting certified in Google ads.
Let me say this. Let's go back a little bit, because this is one thing I also have learned in industry, is that when you are writing these letters like this, in some way trying to quantify like the numbers, like business people want to know like the percentages of, like you said, like what was the no-show rate? Like how many clients actually got better or improved? Like what is that percentage? Is that important, do you think?
I think so, because these companies, if you're wanting to work in a tech role, they care about things like retention and outcomes and lifetime value, because they have to demonstrate metrics. So if those are the metrics that you can demonstrate, great. If it's, hey, 95% of my appointments started on time. If that's it, then that's fine. You can run a tight ship.
Good. All right. We have one question, Noah. What are ways you can make a big impact in mental health without yet having much experience, preferably as a counselor or organization founder? Or what are ways of gaining that valuable experience most efficiently?
Alex, do you want to take that one?
I think there's a lot of ways to make a big impact. Right now, I think the need is so high, and the ability to be really like find your niche, like what is it that gets you excited in mental health? For me, and this is what attracted me with Healthy Gamer, and I just pulled up my cover letter for this job, because I was like, what did I write? And one of the things I really highlighted, which is there's only one thing on my resume that relates to this at all, is I love working with geeks and gamers. Like it's one of my things.
Talk about the certification.
I have there's a geek therapeutics certification out there. It's a real thing. And I have that certification, but they're like my passion work. Like I love those clients. I love diving into all that. So that was a thing that I really highlighted as my passion. And I think that's the answer in terms of like, what's the impact? It's what do you care about? What gets you excited? This is exhausting, hard work, especially these days. And if you want to have an impact, it has to be evident that you care. It doesn't really matter like where the other stuff is, like you have to care. I'm used to working with youth, but youth, adults, all of them, we have really good bullshit detectors. And if you don't care, they're gonna know it. Yeah, and everything is, I mean, like I guess it's cliche and it's not super helpful. Everything is an experience, I think, if you're working in mental health. You know, the annoying, like you went through something hard and it's like, oh, that'll make you a better therapist one day. It's like, oh, I don't want to do that, but but it's true. And there's ways to kind of harness those experiences and turn them into, whether it's actual skill sets of, hey, I know how to have really great communication through high emotions because I had a really emotionally volatile family or something like that. Or you highlight it somehow with that skill in your resume or your cover letter.
That's good. Thank you.
I would just translate one thing you said where your passion point, I would say you're a subject matter expert,
Yes.
right? You understand this population. And so just kind of some of those small translations of like, okay, she's got this certification, but she's got a specialty and an expertise in a certain population, which happens to be the population we care about the most. So I'm not going to have to do that like cultural translation. So I think just to kind of like maybe underscore some of Alex's points here, big impact comes from having a niche or a subject matter expertise in a certain population, a certain treatment, a certain modality. I would kind of play into that. And then gaining that experience, I mean, there's so many nonprofits out there. And I think the ability to volunteer, I understand that it costs time, but even being able to say like, okay, I'm going to do the social media management for this nonprofit and like kind of be able to flex your skills a little bit. That's kind of what I would suggest.
Yeah, that's great advice. I'm gonna also say that same thing, and everyone on this call, Sharon and I included, we're passionate about therapists in tech, but we also have our individual passions. Like mine is women's health, perinatal mental health. Like I'm all in on that. Like anything to do with women's health, I'm all in. And Sharon is trust and safety. Like she's all in on that stuff. Like, so I think that, and also one thing that Kruti said was, you have to label yourself as a subject matter expert. And we have a very, very hard time with saying that. Business people, they're like, no, I'm the expert. We're like, well, no, I don't know. I took a few classes. I studied it for 10 years, but I don't know. I mean, I haven't like written a book, but we just need to own it. And we don't do a good job with that. Like own that skill set. We have another question. So I'm volunteering with 6 organizations. Well, you're busy. Well, thank you for all of your hard work, Noah. Wow, it's a lot. Okay.
I would almost trim that down. You don't want to look like you have too much time.
I would have never thought about that. I would have said like, you might be taking on too much. From a therapy, I would be like, well, it seems like a lot. I'm very busy.
Yeah. I mean, I think it shows like a good capacity for bandwidth. And like, again, like there's a lot of almost the way people think of millennials as entitled. Business leaders are starting to think of therapists as like burnt out. And so it's like, I'm only ever going to get 20 hours out of this person. You know, like it's kind of a practical way to think, okay, if I can only get 20 hours out of this person, I'm only going to get 20 to 30 patients out of this person, depending on like the way the time is structured. And that means this person, I'm going to pay this much, but their economic output has a ceiling to it. Right. So if you can show like, hey, I'm not your 20-hour type, that's great. People are going to love that. But don't set the expectation to an unsustainable rate.
Very good. All right. Here's our first job description that we'll break down.
And
Go ahead, Alex. Go ahead.
feel free to ask specific questions. But so this is just a random job description.
Wait, I should just say, we specifically chose clinical content lead based on TNT's like needs assessment. We actually found out that a lot of people are interested in this role. So I specifically found something on the internet for it. So if anyone is looking for a clinical content role, I think this would be really relevant to anyone in the audience.
Gotcha. So I mean, as opposed to me reading it, I'm wondering, does anyone have any specific questions looking at this, even just like not even reading everything, but kind of looking at the structure, things that may or may not be different in terms of what a clinical therapist job description might look like.
What is content, Alex?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that's
Good question.
that's a good question. What is clinical content?
That's a great question, and it depends on the role in a lot of ways. I was actually just talking to one of my friends who does a lot of SEO work and writes content, and there was a confusion because it's very different than the content that Healthy Gamer puts out. Kruti, how would you describe content? Because I'm going to get it wrong.
Content is the words and the images and the video. It's like the stuff that is actually like in the table of contents, like what you're reading or watching.
I was going to say like the kind of the media that's produced.
Sure.
So the clinical content lead would be kind of the person who, I mean, so for this role, it sounds like the person who's kind of managing and thinking about all those things from fruition through to kind of actual production.
You're like the writer director.
Right. Like almost like you're coming up with all of the communication, the marketing, like things that people are going to read. But even also like when I say marketing, I think sometimes people think of it like trying to sell, but in a way that people want to participate in the product or participate in the content or actually read it. So like it says like great writer and loves writing. You've got to love this stuff. I mean, I tried to do content writing for a little bit and I was like, no, not my strong. Thanks for having me. I mean, I was good, but I'm like, I don't love this enough to want to do it all the time.
One thing that always stands out to me, moving from like therapist to more of an operations role, is like the very first core responsibility of cultivating a deep understanding of the users. I can see a lot of people being like, I have no idea how to do that. I don't know what that means. Therapists know what that means. We just don't know those words. It's a needs assessment. It's an assessment of a client. You kind of take that same skill set and kind of do this through, it's a user as opposed to one individual client. It's a group of users. It's a population. But we have that, our brains are structured to do that assessment level. It's not that hard of a skill to kind of update and adapt to. Same thing with analyzing lesson performance.
The same thing.
Yep.
We're
very good at assessing and analyzing, and those are the kind of things that like you can see. The language might be different, but we have those skill sets.
It's funny because I read this and I feel like it's so straightforward, but yeah, so like user journeys, lesson performance, improved performance,
Outcomes.
Testing, right? Working
Yeah.
cross-functionally, like we all have done that pretty much.
run A/B tests. Okay, so the user journey is literally just where are they coming? They came from this page and then they went into this video and then they exited. This video must be boring. Or they went to this page, they went to this video, they went back to this page, they went to another video, they went back to this page. They're spending too much time going back to these pages. We need to be able to like let people go from one video to the next video to the next video. So it's literally just understanding the sequence of content people are accessing by reviewing their lesson inputs. So like they clicked this, they filled out this exercise, they submitted this questionnaire. Lesson performance, that's things like completion rates, comprehension rates. And then you would say like, 60% of people are barely passing this lesson. We're not doing a good enough job teaching, or maybe this is a little too hard. This assessment is maybe a little too challenging. And so your strategy and plan would literally be like, make assessments easier to understand and make all questions yes, no, or multiple choice instead of whatever. And that's what your plan would be to improve performance, increase the pass rate from 65% to 85%. There's your plan.
And then I think like we can like, what I'm learning here is that if you take the core responsibilities and really break it down, like you can put that information in your cover letter, like this is how I would do these things.
Exactly. So if you're applying for this job, right, you would, those things about performance metrics, like people are always on time, or that's going to kind of translate into like, okay, this person understands when something's working or not working.
Your documentation's always in on time. You've helped people develop documentation. That kind of stuff is going to really go to like, oh, you're a writer.
Yeah.
I'll also say like, just because myself and my friends, like, remember this is a clinical content lead role for this one. And, you know, if you don't know what a user journey is, if you don't know what A/B testing, you don't know what these specific terms, you still know the processes. And I think, and I can't remember if it was with you or with Alec that I like, there was something that I was asked, I'm like, I do not know that term. I don't like, that's not the barrier. The other things that like, I don't need to know what do we have, like LTV and all these things. I'm like, what? I can learn those things very quickly. They're just definitions. Whereas you're bringing something unique with the clinical, they're looking for that. So yeah, it's kind of, don't get too bogged down in those details that you're like, oh, I don't know this, I don't qualify for this job.
Let's hop over to the next one. We don't have that much time and I want to get to our last slide. Oh, this is it. Oh, okay.
We actually took out the last one.
Okay, well, let's talk about the, we have one question. Okay. Is there a resource for figuring out salary ranges for these types of jobs? What is typical for a clinical content lead? I'm trying to figure out how it compares to working as a clinician in a clinical setting and whether making a switch makes sense. I have two resources for this, but I'm going to go back to the beginning of this conversation. Those salaries now might look totally different right now in this market. And I would be hesitant to compare what people are saying, like what they were paid in 2020 doing the same role. It's probably going to look a little different moving forward. But I do have two resources. We have one in the community. We did a survey and we wrote an article about salaries in tech. And then there's also a resource with Alpha. They have a huge resource of salaries. And I'll put that in the chat. And then let's go ahead and talk about coaching program.
So if you're trying to figure out how it compares to working as a clinician in your clinical setting, whether the switch makes sense, I would say it only is going to really make sense if it's like 20% or more than you're making where you are. Otherwise, the risk of like the layoff and things like that, this is just like my personal advice, may not be worth it. Oftentimes, roles like this have very quick like promotion raise paths, because if you're good, it's hard for a company to say, hey, you've never done this before, but I'm going to pay you, you know, $150,000 to do this work. You've never done it before. It's going to be a lot more palatable for somebody to say, hey, I'm going to bring you on at 85. And if you can hit these metrics, I'm happy to bump that up, because if you can make content that has impacts on the way we retain our clients, yeah, you're responsible for that. So yes, I'm happy to bonus you. So I would kind of think about bonusing and really understanding what those key metrics are. And if you are a fixer or an optimizer and you don't completely understand those metrics, I think it's totally fair to ask that hiring manager, do you have examples of how this was done really well? Do you guys have processes in place that enable success on these metrics, or would I be building that from scratch? Are you able to demonstrate, hey, this other content initiative was really successful, and here's why. Right now, I would strongly suggest a private practice route. I think providers have more bargaining power than you've ever seen before. I think you've got demand out the wazoo right now. The main thing is I would hire, if you don't want to do this yourself, I would just hire somebody to make you a simple website and make sure you're on Google Places with an address. So that way people see when they type therapist near me, you show up. So just do Google Places or Google Pages. I think that one thing will help you set up your private practice and make sure, you fill out your bios and stuff like that on Psychology Today and others.
Vanessa's asking, do you have any recommendations for therapists in training who want to eventually work in mental health tech? We're working on that, but do you all have any other suggestions?
Yeah, I would learn 3 things. I would learn some product management essentials. I would learn some like basic online copywriting. And I would learn something like Google Analytics. Because your ability to just understand simple things like bounce rates or pages per session, time spent, like those kinds of basic digital metrics is really going to help you. Product or project management basics is going to teach you how to work with different people and set like an actual plan up. I think like everybody is writing for the web, which we all know is different than writing anywhere else. So you'll want to be able to do that.
Okay, last thing, let's talk about your program.
Oh yeah. So I don't know if you can actually click this. I linked it in the chat, but the Healthy Gamer Referral Network, we're setting this up now. We work with a lot of content creators who are looking for therapists. So if you're interested in working with YouTubers, Twitch streamers, things like that, we have a very interesting, very special kind of fun population to work with. We also work with a lot of young people, and Noah would love to be able to pair them with like younger therapists because that is such a cultural gap right now. And then we also like having, mental health consultants, as we call them, that can help this. You'd be working directly with Alex on making sure that our coaches have really great support and advice as they're managing their client loads. So if you're interested in a little bit of extra work, please do let us know.
Yeah.
This
Cool.
was amazing.
Great.
Thank you so much, both of you. Really appreciate this.
Thanks for the
having
invite.
us.